Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. If you would like to get a copy of the slides that you can scroll through as we go through them together, you can use the bit.ly on the screen. Just make sure that you type it in as it's written because it is case sensitive. There is also a PDF version of this in Sketch if you would like to download it and save for later. But we'll get started in just a couple minutes at right about 1 o'clock. Hi, everyone. We're going to get started here in just a minute. If you would like to follow along, the bit.ly is on the screen. If you want to type that in, you'll be able to scroll through it with us. It is case sensitive, so just make sure you capitalize VSTE and then the P in productivity. There's also a copy of this in a PDF form on Sketch for you to save and to look at later. All right, so it is 1 o'clock, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Hopefully you all are in the right spot. We are going to talk about all the little things you need and some hacks for productivity. And I appreciate you all joining me here. I know it is 1 o'clock on Tuesday, the last session before our closing session of VSTE. So thank you for making good use of your time, and I hope that you can learn something that you can use tomorrow. So a little bit about me. My name is Julie Beasley. I am a chemistry teacher in Spotsylvania County, Virginia. I have been obsessed with productivity since 2020 when I was at virtual VSTE, kind of like you all now are now, but we were all virtual back then. And I saw a presentation and I was just obsessed. I was obsessed with the idea of getting the most that I possibly could out of my day. And so ever since then, I've just been researching and trying to find more and more information to get tasks done quickly. Kind of in that quest for productivity, I've learned some different ed tech tools. So I'm a Canvas certified educator. I'm also Google level 2 certified educator. And I guess one of the reasons that I think productivity is so important is because us as teachers and admin, ITRTs, this really applies to anybody in the world, but especially us teachers, is that we have so much on our plates that we cannot possibly get through it all. So we really need to use our time that we have in our contract hours wisely so that we can spend more time rejuvenating ourselves, doing that self-care that's so important. Otherwise, we're going to burn out, and that won't be good for anybody. So I always like to start off by talking about the British cycling team. And you may think, okay, well, this is random. Why is she talking about them? Well, because I think they're really the icon and the showboat of the fact that just a small change can make a big improvement. So the story, and this is all true, is that for almost 100 years, between 1908 and 2003, the British cycling team was, I put mediocre on the slides, but they really struggled. They only had one gold Olympic medal in almost 100 years. So in 2003, a new coach came in, and he said that he wasn't going to overhaul the team. He wasn't going to make any big drastic changes. Instead, he was going to change every area of that team by 1%. So he made the bikes 1% lighter, made the riders 1% leaner. He trained 1% harder. And within a 5-year time span, the next time the Olympics rolled around, that same team that was previously mediocre won 60% of the gold medals. So it's not always about the biggest tasks or the biggest thing you can do to make a change. It's about making small changes in lots of different areas. So if you have a second, you can either scan this QR code or click the link on the Padlet and just tell me what stops you from being productive. Oh gosh, I forgot to clear it from my last session, but that's okay. If you see anything on there that you like, you can heart it. You can add your own things to it. See a couple new ones popping up. So being pulled in all directions, time, life distractions. Oh, I like that one. If I don't have enough time to finish, I just won't start. Yeah, that is true. Sometimes those big tasks can just be so daunting that it's hard to find the motivation to get started. Last minute distractions, your health, yeah. And I think that not being productive and not using our time wisely can also adversely impact our health. We all know that stress is not good for our body. So too much to do, swamped with work. I feel you. I feel you. Trying to do too many things at the same time. You guys have awesome responses to this. So thank you for filling that out. And I think you guys kind of fell right into what I was going to talk about next, which I think is the most common problem people face, which is distractions. And really all of those things, last minute distractions, life distractions, too much to do, interruptions I see just popped up. All of those things cause us to not meet our productivity goals, to not be as accomplished as we could. So some of the most common distractions that I see when I talk to teachers, people not in education, or even my students, is they talk about notifications. So those notifications on our phones, if we have them on our desks, notifications in our browser, so calendar notifications, email notifications, all those things kind of fog up our mind when we have too many things racing through it. And that kind of ties into email. So habitually checking your email, although inherently it's not a terrible thing, but if you're trying to accomplish something, checking your email several times over and over again can certainly be a distraction. As well as physical clutter on our desks, or I think we've all probably seen the student that has one folder for all subjects, or they dump out their backpacks and the papers are just, all over the place. Right? Physical clutter is not good for us because it slows down our mind. And then also that digital clutter. So having lots of tabs open, lots of apps open, especially if you're not using them. Our coworkers, so I love this image here on the screen. Please don't talk to me. I have no self-control and we'll talk to you for 2 hours and get no work done, right? I think I love my coworkers, and there's nothing I love more than when the teacher next door comes into my room and she says, "Did you just see that email we got?" Right? I mean, I love that, and I love connecting with my coworkers that way, but sometimes they stop us from getting things done. But really and truly, there are a million distractions. There will always be something to distract you from what you're trying to accomplish. So you have to give yourself a purpose. You have to set out and say, this is what I want to accomplish, and this is how I'm going to do it, and this is that time frame. So during this presentation, we're going to go through a couple of sections. First, we're going to talk about the habits of productive people. We're going to talk about how to manage that mail, so particularly our email. We're going to talk about taking control with calendar, and then we're going to talk about some grading hacks. Now, I will preface by saying two things. So the first, I'm at a Google school, so most of my examples are Google-based, but I have talked to some people who are at a Microsoft-based school, and a lot of these things apply to Microsoft Edge or Outlook, so they can be applied there. The second thing is that any tool, any tip or trick that I give you is only as good as you're willing to make it. So I can tell you all about the different Chrome extensions to help you be productive, but if you choose to, instead of playing Chrome, play on your phone, it's not going to do you much good. So it does take some willpower. So first, we're going to start with habits of productive people. The big idea here, kind of along the lines with distractions, is you've got to be intentional about what you do and when. So the first thing I always like to start off with is something that some people have heard of before, which is the Pomodoro technique. So the Pomodoro technique I really like because it breaks down tasks into small sections. So 25 minutes is about the ideal time for us to have uninterrupted productivity. So what I mean by that is that that's about as long as our brains can really focus hard on a task before we start to fall off of the productivity and we start to slow down. So what you do is every 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break, and you repeat that cycle 5 or 4 times, and then you get a longer break. So my school is on a 90-minute bell schedule. So I really like to even implement this into my classroom. We do about 25 minutes of a warm up or review. We take a 5-minute break for transitions and then repeat that cycle. There's also a Chrome extension if you are a Chrome user, or there's tons of apps on your phone that you can use as well for this. Another thing that's really important is to know your chronotype. So essentially all a chronotype is are you a morning bird or a night owl? So I am an early bird. I like to get up at 4 a.m. and that's when I get my big task accomplished because I know that I have more brain power. I'm a little more alert earlier in the morning as opposed to come 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That's when I do my kind of mindless tasks. So transferring grades, making copies, those things I do later in the afternoon because it doesn't require as much brain power. So just take an inventory of what you think you are and then schedule your tasks around that. Now, also another thing to take into account is that unitasking is real, multitasking is not. Our students love to say that they can get our work done, they can email their teacher and text their mom and take notes all at the same time. It's amazing, right? But really, they can't do that, not effectively anyway, right? They might be accomplishing all of them, but not particularly well. So just focus on one task at a time. You're going to get a higher quality result and you're going to get it done quicker. Time blocking will really help with this, and we'll talk about the time blocking technique in a little bit. All right, now, if there is one thing that I want you to take out of this presentation, it's the weekly review. This might have been the most life-changing thing for me when I was trying to figure out how to sustain teaching so that I didn't burn out. And it's a really simple idea, idea. Honestly, a lot of these things are really simple. They're just things we might not have thought to do or thought to implement. So what the weekly review is that once a week, I do it on Friday, but you could certainly do it Monday morning. On Friday, I look at the next week. I look at any meetings I have, any big tasks I need to accomplish, anything that has to get done. And I put that down. So I do it in Google Calendar, but we'll talk about some different places for that. You want to look at any unoccupied time and fill in with things you want to do. So for example, since I teach chemistry, labs are kind of a must do for me, right? So if on Wednesday, I know that I'm doing a lab in class, I'm going to schedule time on Tuesday to get my glassware out and set it up in my classroom. If I have any big projects that I'm assigning, I might set aside time to get them graded. Any 504 IEP meetings, those go there as well. And then any extra time I have, right? That's when I put in things I want to do. Now, there are a couple different places you can put that weekly review or just tasks in general. And I'm going to go through 3 different solutions. So the first one, and I think maybe one of the most simple, is Google Keep. So if you're not familiar with Google Keep, it's not in your Drive the same way Sheets and Docs and Slides are. It's actually its own website. So it's keep.google.com. But essentially what it is it's digital sticky notes. So what I used to do before I kind of changed to Google Calendar was I would have one for each day of the week. So on Monday, I would put down any meetings or any tasks I needed to accomplish. Same thing for Tuesday, things like that. So you could do it by day, which is what I found to be the most helpful, but you could also do it by the courses that you teach. So you might have a list for like I have one for chemistry, one for IB chemistry. You might have one for all the different topics that you teach. Or you could even, if you're an ITRT or some other person who has more project-based things, you could do it by project. Now, the really nice thing about these is they can also be shared. So I put things on a curriculum one, which I'll just go ahead and show you. So this is what Google Keep looks like. So again, I have one for each day of the week, but I also have one for just general curriculum updates. Now, these are not things that have a timeline associated with them. They're just kind of, maybe next year we could implement this lab, or maybe next year we change this test. So those things go in my curriculum updates Google Keep on that sticky note. And I can share that with all the people in my PLC so they can all see it. Oh, goodness. There we go. I also really recommend Google Keep for your personal life too. You can use it for a packing list, which is nice, or also a grocery list. And because you can share these things with other people in your household, they can easily cross things off and add to that list as well. And these are some custom Google Keep headers that I made, and they are linked in the Padlet you'll get at the end of this. Now, the second solution is Google Calendar, and I really think that Google Tasks, they're kind of one and the same. But essentially what Tasks is it's a to-do list. So it's accessible either through Gmail or in Google Calendar, but I like it because it's visual. Like Google Keep, you can check it off and it will cross itself out. The addition that I think Tasks adds that Google Keep doesn't, and again, depending on how complex or how just visually what you like, you can dictate which you choose. But Tasks allows you to put a due date with a time on it. So instead of just having something on your Monday Google Keep, you could say check mailbox by 2:30 on Monday, and it will put that date and time. And so this is kind of what it looks like. So in the Gmail view, it's over. So you've got your calendar. There's also a shortcut to Keep right here. And then this little circle with the checkbox in it, that's Google Tasks. And so you can just quickly add a task. You can even in Gmail, there's a button to take, like if someone sends you an email, it will automatically create a task for you. What this looks like from the calendar side is when you do this, not only does it show up here on this list, but it will also automatically put it in your Google Calendar. And that's these small gray boxes. And when you complete them, it checks it off and crosses it out, which for me gives me some pleasure to see something crossed off my list. Now, the third solution, and again, not revolutionary, but you can always do it on paper pencil, right? We live in a world of so many tabs and so many websites and apps that sometimes it's just nice to have things on paper and pencil. So I recommend if you're going to do a planner, you could of course do the big desk calendar. That works really well for some people. If you want to do more of a like binder style planner or something smaller like that, I recommend the simplified planner. I don't get any money for you clicking this link, but I do like it because it puts it out hourly. So there's a slot for 8, 9, 10, 11, so on and so forth. And then it also has an area for to-do list tasks. So I think that's really nice. It's a women-owned business. It's a small business. So, and then they have nice thick paper in their planners. So that's important to me. But again, by no means you need to purchase that one. It's just helpful. Now, once you've put out all your appointments and all your must-dos, now is time to do the time blocking with that extra space. So remember, we've already talked about the fact that you should schedule tasks based on your chronotype. So think about that. And then also you want to do all your tasks that are similar or the same at one time. So time blocking is essentially just both of those things applied. So what you want to do is you want to set aside time. So for example, we need to be in the hallway for students by 7:15, but we report to work at 7. So I have about 15 minutes, which isn't a lot of time. But every day at that time, from 7 to 7:15, I check my emails. That is what I do every day. I don't try and check emails and grade something and go to the copier. I just do one task at the same time. So usually I can get through most of my emails in that 15-minute time block. But again, I also like to do all my printing at one time. So during the first 30 minutes of my planning on Mondays, that's when I'm going to do all my copies for the week because I can get them punched out quickly. And it stops me from having to go back to the copier several times. And again, I'm not saving hours by doing that, but I'm saving minutes and I'm saving that time that it takes your brain to switch back and forth between tasks had I gone to the copier every day. All right, now let's talk about getting organized because I know this is something that a lot of people struggle with, and it can also be really taxing on our minds when we're trying to find something we can't locate it. So first, we're going to talk about how to organize your tabs because I do recall someone saying they had lots of tabs open. So both Chrome and Microsoft Edge allows you to put tabs into groups. And this isn't really anything new. I think that Chrome came out with this feature about 2 years ago, but it's something that a lot of people forget or just forget that it exists or forget to use it. So utilize that. So for example, sometimes I don't get through all my emails in that 15 minutes. So what I do is I make a section or a group and I call an email, and that way it's still there. I didn't close the tab so I can access it later, but it's not in my way. It's not taking up lots of space. I like to show this to students too, because a lot of times they'll have 3 or 4 tabs open for maybe an English paper they're writing. Well, it's time for chemistry class. So we don't want all those tabs open. So I'll have them put it in a group and minimize it so they didn't close it. It's not permanent, but it's just not in the way. And think about sometimes when you're using 2 or 3 tabs, like I know that I frequently am sometimes looking at my Canvas page and an old assignment that I had on paper, kind of a PDF version. And I'm flipping back and forth between those tabs, kind of copying things down. Well, every once in a while, I'll click on the wrong tab. Like heaven forbid, I click on my email and I see a new email. Well, I have now diverted my mind from that task I was doing, and now I'm focusing on my email. So closing those tabs just prevents us from wandering and getting distracted, which we said earlier was a major issue. Now, another place that needs organization is your Drive or your OneDrive. So those places where you store all those files, even if it's on your computer itself, it's got to be organized. So whatever method you use, be consistent with it. As soon as you get a new document and it says copy of, change the name to fit your naming scheme, put it in the appropriate folder right as you create them. That way, when you're looking for something, you can find it really easily. I also really like to color code things. I do folders and folders and folders, and that's okay. That's kind of what it's made for, right? Thankfully, it's just not filling up a filing cabinet. If your Google Drive is what I would call a hot mess express, I really recommend the Detox by Erin Integration. She'll have you sign up for it and give your email, but what happens is every day you'll get an email with a short task to complete. So the first day might be to search for any untitled documents and either delete them or rename them and file them away. So it's just short little things, but at the end of 14 days, you'll have a nice organized drive. And to be honest, sometimes I think it's just really nice to be able to see what an organized drive looks like. And I will say that mine is not perfect by any means, nor is it necessarily the only way you can organize it. But this is what mine looks like. So to just give you a little bit of context, I like to separate things into my drive and then shared or team drives. So anything that goes in my drive are things that are only pertinent to me. So my professional development, my notes for Visti, those things go in folders in my drive. In our team drives are where we share content. So things that I want multiple people to edit, those are going to go in team drives. So we have a team drive for chemistry, and then this is within that. So this is my IB chemistry drive. It's a screenshot of it. And I organize things by unit because that's what makes sense to me. Now, you'll notice that to get out of kind of that default alphabetical organizing, my degree's in chemistry, not English, to get out of that default alphabetical order, because for example, like internal assessment, I don't want to use that folder super often, so I don't want it up top. To me, it makes sense to have my units first. So in order to get out of that, you just put a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in front of it, and then that will kind of go by default. So let's just say I click on Unit 10, the redox process. This is what it will look like. So within my unit folder, I have folders for notes, for worksheets, for study guides, for quizzes and tests. And then it's fine to keep some things kind of on the outside. So my Unit 10 outline, that applies to the whole unit. Same thing with my written notes. To me, that kind of applies to the whole unit. So I keep those readily accessible. But if I went and I clicked on any of the different units, so again, this is Unit 10, but if I clicked on Unit 9, it's going to look the same way. It's going to have an outline. It's going to have my notes, folders for notes, worksheets, study guides, quizzes, and tests. So again, that consistency makes it really easy, because if a student comes up and they say, hey, Miss Beasley, can I have a copy of the study guide for Unit 3? I know exactly how to get to it and where to find it. All right, so now we're going to talk about managing the mail. Again, mine examples are specific for Gmail, but I do think a lot of it applies to any other mail system you may use. Now, email at some point during the pandemic really became something else, right? It started to consume us. And I think my heart hurts when I see other people, be it students or other teachers, that have 1,972 unread messages. To me, that would stress me out. That would make me, I wouldn't want to read my email, because I'd probably just be so kind of just couldn't even function looking at, I don't even have words for it. So let's talk about how to do it. This is what my mailbox looks like. I have no new mail. Now, granted, things come in all the time, but this is just that screenshot. So how do I get to this point where that now when I get an email, it's going to be the only thing I see? So it's not bogged down by lots and lots of emails. It's upfront because it's important. The method I got to this point by was by Inbox Zero. Now, I'll say before I talk about how to manage once you get here, to get to this point, you're going to need to delete things that are not relevant. So those parent emails from 6 years ago, we probably don't need those. The reminder of a faculty meeting from last year, probably don't need that either. So just go through and just do a mass clean out things you don't need anymore, delete them. If you do need them, we'll talk about how to organize them and put them away. So again, this technique is known as Inbox Zero. So what happens when I get an email is there are one of 4 things that can happen to it. I can either do it right away. So if it's something like, hey, Miss Beasley, can you reopen the naming quiz for me? If I need to reopen that and it's really easy for me to do, I just do it right away. It takes me maybe a minute to do that for a student. I can either defer it. So I might say, oh, this task might take longer than 10 minutes or 2 minutes. So I'm going to put it off till later. I can either delegate it. So if it's not pertinent to my job is not my responsibility. I'm going to forward that email to somebody else, and then I'm going to get it out of my inbox. Last thing I can do is I can delete it. So spam mails, I like to unsubscribe and delete those. Again, if it's just completely random and has nothing to do with me, just get it out of the way and delete it. Now, when it comes to organizing your mail, you need to think about it as that mail that gets on our kitchen counters, right? I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but sometimes I go to the mailbox and it just seems like there's envelopes everywhere. We have to treat our inboxes like that too. We have to do the same thing. So in Gmail and in Outlook as well, you can create folders to organize your mail. So make them with labels. Also clean out that mail yearly or more frequently if that applies to you, but you don't have to delete things. So that's the biggest misconception I get, is that people don't want to delete things because it seems so permanent, right? Like they don't want that 2-hour delayed bell schedule right now because it's August and there's no snow, but you might want it later. So instead of deleting it, you can archive it. So let me go back to this screenshot of mine. So when I say make multiple folders, this is what I mean. So I have a folder for things I want to reference. So that's where my 2-hour delay bell schedule is. I have one for student contact and then also one for parent contact because that's something I want to keep. So when I get a new mail, up at the top, there's a little button that has kind of like a, let's see if I have a screenshot of it. Felt like I did. Okay, so it's kind of on my next slide, but this one, my Giphy went away. That second one right there, that's kind of like a folder, that's how you archive something. So again, it's not deleting it, it's just putting it away. It's getting it off the kitchen counter. Now, if you want to defer something, so it's something you want to do later, that's when you can use that snooze button that's there. Again, it's been there and we all probably knew about it, but maybe we just didn't really know when or why to use it. So for example, while I've been at Vista, my emails that I get from students, if it's something that I can't do right away or something that I just am not in the mindset to do, I'm snoozing it until I return to school tomorrow. And that's completely okay to do, right? Because next time you get an email, it's going to be right there. It's going to be at the forefront and it's going to be important. All right, now we're going to talk about taking control with our calendars. So really, I fall back on this quote that was a failure to plan is a plan to fail, right? If we don't give ourselves tasks, if we don't give ourselves purpose, we're not going to get much done. So I really recommend using, I use Google Calendar, but again, Keep or even, a paper pencil planner, these same ideas kind of exist. So I really recommend Google Calendar. Now, there are a couple things that I like about Google Calendar over Keep and a physical planner. But again, we all start somewhere. I started using Google Keep for 2 years before I ever got to Calendar. Maybe you're just looking for a way to up your game. But what I like about Calendar is that it integrates that schedule and tasks together like we looked at earlier. I also like that it's really accessible from anywhere. So I can access it on my phone, at work, at school, wherever I am, I can access it from any device. I can even make multiple calendars. So I can have a personal, I can have my school calendar, I could have a doctor's appointments or bills calendar. So there's plenty of uses for calendar outside of just education. So this is what my calendar looks like. I feel like it's just really helpful to see what calendar can look like in action. So again, I'm a classroom teacher. So I put my classes in there. Now, I don't put my classes in there because I don't know when they are, right? That's not my issue. I like to put those classes in there once so I can see what I'm doing throughout the day. I also imagine if you have a really tight PLC who likes to use calendar, now you can actually insert documents and things into calendar. So you could do your lesson planning that way if it's helpful for you. I also like to be able to visually see when planning and of course, when lunch is. I also have my district's calendar, this purple one up top. That's their calendar that I have overlaid. So I can see when it's an A day, a B day. I can see the early release schedule, things like that. So what I like to do is I also like to put these tasks, even though I'm teaching B8, I know that I just made up a student, but let's say Leslie needed to take her final exam. Well, Leslie needs to take her final exam because she wasn't here the day that we all took it. So I can put a task in there. That way, as I'm taking attendance, I'm going to get that push notification that says, hey, Leslie, final exam. And I'll know she needs to go in the hallway and she needs to work on that. I also, again, like it for time blocking because I can see my planning periods really easily. So for example, on this day, I needed to submit my grades by 1:30. So I could figure that this time here was when I was going to do that. I also really like to color code if you didn't notice. So that is one of my tips there for Google Calendars to color code. But when you do that weekly review, add those things straight to your calendar. That's a perfect task to do. You can also, like I mentioned, make different calendars for different areas. And I like that in calendar, you can easily check them in order to have them overlaid so you can see kind of your day as a whole, or you can uncheck them when you don't want to see them. So for example, my school has a building use calendar that I don't need to see all the time, right? I don't need to know who's using the auditorium at 2:00 on Tuesday. But if I needed to, I could check the box for that calendar and it would pop up. So I'd be able to access that information. But since I don't want it all the time, I hide it just by unclicking the box next to that calendar's name. Again, I think color coding for me is really, really helpful. So I recommend that. You can use it to help you visualize kind of the different areas. I know some people who, for example, who work outside of education that like to have meetings in blue. They like to have certain projects in green and, more free time in a different color. So use it to what helps you. Like I have students who use calendar, surprisingly enough, and they always put their math class in red because math is red and social studies is orange. And so use it to help you. Now I like mine to be a little less chaotic, not quite so over the rainbow per se, but if you like to color code things or just kind of a tip in general, there's a website called coolors.co and it has great color palettes that are a little more monochromatic, or at least they're in the same color palette. So that's where I get mine from if you're interested. Now, some other calendar tips, you can set it to send you an email. So the same way that Sketch sends us emails for our VSTE conference, the way that, this morning you got your Outlook for the day, calendar can do the same thing. So if you're a person who's really heavy on meetings, or you just like to have that paper in front of you, that is certainly an option. Also new to calendar, I think this year, was that you can now use the appointment schedule for people who don't have a Google account. So previously it was only, you would have to sign into Google to make appointments. And for me, for using it for parent teacher conferences, it was not always the best choice because they didn't always have Google accounts. Well, now it kind of creates a short form. You send a link. It's really easy. And they can do it without having to sign into Google. So I could see like an ITRT using this for teacher help time and things like that. And again, any calendars that have been shared with you that you don't want to see, just unclick the box, make it nice, neat. Again, we only are focusing on certain things at certain times. All right. Now, lastly, we're going to go on to some grading hacks. So the big idea, I remember when I was in college, I was so excited to be a teacher, right? I am like, I'm going to change the minds of students everywhere and it's going to be great. And then I realized that there was a lot of grading involved. And I remember Dr. Broom in college, she said, you can't grade what you don't assign. And I thought, well, don't we need to assess their knowledge every single day, maybe multiple times a day, with a do now, with a practice, with a homework? The answer is no, right? And I went to a really awesome session about an hour and a half ago, and my mind is just spinning about grading, but I'll try and stick to what I had planned. But ask yourself generally, like, what is the purpose of this assignment? Is the purpose of this assignment to assess some sort of standard? It really should be, right? We aren't giving busy work just for fun. There should be some sort of a purpose. Is this purpose more formative? Are we just doing a kind of a review? Is it meant to practice what they just learned? Or is it summative? Is it meant to be like an exam of some kind? So just ask yourself those questions. And then also, depending on what that assessment is, what is the best delivery for it? So for English teachers, you might have a digital, it's probably going to be some more of a written assignment. You probably don't want that on paper. Sometimes for math classes, it's really hard to do digital things. So it might be a paper assignment or maybe even a mix. So just think about what is the goal? What is going to be easiest for students to accomplish this task on? Remember, we are in blended learning. Not everything has to be online. And then ask yourself, do students need a numerical grade? Or do you need to put a numerical grade in? Or think about if it's just a formative thing, if they're just practicing what they've learned, you can probably glance over it pretty quickly and say whether they have it or not. Because really what they're looking for is feedback so that they can master it by the time they get to that SOL or that test or that quiz. But if it does need a numerical grade, which personally for quizzes and tests, I would say probably do, think about how you can set it to auto grade. So if you want 1,001 ways to ditch that worksheet, I definitely recommend Matt Miller's Ditch That Textbook. If you just Google it, you'll find all sorts of goodies. It's a bit of a rabbit hole to go down, but it's awesome. But I'm just going to go over a couple that I found to be easy substitutions for the old worksheet that came out of the back of the textbook. Because again, we're trying to spend less time at school, but get more out of our time. So we don't always have the hours in the day to create that brand new, super engaging activity. Sometimes we're just trying to go up a step from where we were last year, and that's okay. So we're going to talk about some task lists, which I recently discovered and I really, really liked. We're going to talk about task cards, and then just some ways that we can speed up the grading process. So task lists are something that, again, seems so obvious to me once I thought about them, but just the idea had never passed my mind. So essentially what a task list is you take those same skills that you want students to show you. So the example I'll give is a couple weeks ago, again, I teach chemistry. So I wanted students to be able to predict what the molecules would look like in 3D. So they needed to tell me what the shapes would be and they needed to draw them out. So previously there would have just been a worksheet. They would have drawn it out on paper, they would have put it in the bin, and then a day later I'd grade it, and 2 days later they'd get it back. So that feedback loop was kind of slow and tedious. So what I did instead was I took those same kind of questions, right? I didn't recreate the wheel. All I did was on a little slip of paper about the size of a brochure or a little menu at a restaurant, I put I had them create the molecular structure for methane or something. And what I had them do was I had them build it with Cheerios and little pretzel sticks, and they built it out on a lab station, right? Super easy for me, not really much involved. But what I did was as they progressed through the tasks, they had to check it off. So the first one they did, I needed to go over, I needed to check it. I could orally assess whether they understood by just asking them a couple questions, and then I'd sign off on it. And I would just go around the classroom. And to me, it was such a nice day. I felt so good after it because I'd been involved with them. I knew right away which students did or did not get it, and I didn't need to give them a numerical grade. I had them turn it into the bin, and I gave them a little check in the grade book for completing it to show that they did it and they were there that day. But it was just so nice that I didn't have to grade anything, and I felt like they enjoyed it more too because they were working with a partner, they were collaborating, and they got immediate feedback from me. So I really recommend task lists if you haven't tried it already. I'm already thinking about how I can do it next week. Now, another kind of iteration of this is task cards. So again, it's the same idea where you're copying those questions into a different format and having students maybe answer in a slightly different way. So you're going to put those questions on small cards and you can put them around the room. Now, I've seen all sorts of different kind of unique ways to amplify this experience on Teachers Pay Teachers. Some teachers have created QR codes that go on the back. Students can scan and see a walkthrough of how to solve the problem. You could always, have students go around and answer all the questions, then turn that in. but to me, you're still grading that, which might slow it down. It's not really doing anything to get rid of that worksheet. It's not really saving you any time. So you can put those answers on the back. You can, of course, go around and check students off as they're completing these tasks, because really, for me, sometimes the alternative, I can have students, doing project or, working on an assignment or practice problems. And what I would be doing during that time is maybe replying to 2 emails until somebody asks me a question. So I'm not even going to have a long span of uninterrupted time while I have students in the room. So why not use that time wisely and kind of grade as they're going along? Save yourself time later. Now, if you just don't have time to revamp the worksheet into a task card or task list or some other form of assessment, you can always use spot checking. So, I remember back in the day, we used to switch papers and grade somebody else's. I don't know that that's a good idea. I don't know that I would want students knowing how many questions others got right or wrong. So I wouldn't recommend that. But you could, of course, just go around and look at the first 2 or 3 problems and see whether or not they get it. Again, if a student's mastered that, they're going to get the first 5 right and probably the next 15 right. So you don't need to always check every single question. Now, if you have a longer assignment like papers or maybe a lab report, you might want to go with just highlighting. Either, you can, of course, do wrong answers, but always give some positive feedback too. For example, I had my students writing a lab report and I highlighted things that needed improvement in red and then things that I thought were really good in green. So that saved me from having to write a comment for every single sentence. All right, now I also today, there's some really interesting stuff going on with more mastery-based grading. So again, you don't need to grade every single thing. You could do more of a completion system. So if you're spot checking and you see that they do really, really well, give them a check plus. Maybe that goes as a 100 in your grade book or a 5, depending on what system you use, points or percents. If they did well, but it wasn't perfect, you could give them a check. If it was completed but needs a lot of improvement, maybe a check minus, or if it was just really bad, maybe an X. And again, you can decide how you want to weigh these in your system. This isn't a presentation about grading, so I won't go too deep into it, but I just encourage you to think outside of the box when it comes to grading. All right, and then kind of our last section here I'm going to talk about is how to set things up to auto grade. So for those tests and quizzes, because they tend to be longer assignments for me, and I have 150 students roughly in my classes, I need those to grade quickly, right? So that I am not spending hours and hours grading every quiz and test by hand. So what I like about this is, one, students can oftentimes, depending on the tool in your settings, they can get feedback either right away or, within an hour or 2, or just how long it takes you to put it in the grade book or to tell them. So it saves a ton of time. A lot of these assignments can also be used from year to year. So it saves you that time at the copier every year. It saves you, time trying to find that worksheet or whatnot. And usually they're more interactive than just that basic old, here's 10 questions on a piece of paper. They can do drag and drop. Some tools even have, word searches that you can do. And you still have that option. Like, it could give students a numerical grade. So, they know they got a 75%. But if you want to, it still gives you the flexibility to put it in as a 100. So I feel like it just opens a lot of doors for you and it doesn't close many. So these are some of my favorite tools. By no means is this an exhaustive list of tools that will auto grade or digital tools, but I'm just going to quickly go through a couple of them. So the first one I really like is Canvas quizzes. I know that almost every district in Virginia is using Canvas. So Canvas quizzes are really helpful because they're already integrated in it. Students don't have to sign into anything else. And we just want them to be familiar with Canvas because also as they progress through middle and then high school and then even into college, almost all of those institutions are using Canvas. What I particularly like about Canvas quizzes is that it has lots of question types. So it has sorting, fill in the blank, equation, essay. But I really like that it also allows students to master the content. So it's easy to give them more than one attempt. So if you you can give them unlimited attempts, or you can give them 2 or 3 or 4. You tell it how many times you want students to do it. It will also automatically grade itself. So you can have it set so that students know right as soon as they hit the submit button, whether they got it or whether they didn't. And then if your district has grade passback, which is when the Canvas gradebook will automatically put things in your district gradebook, extra points for Canvas quizzes. So for example, today my students were doing an assignment that was a Canvas quiz. So I just said it to be a multiple choice, kind of a do now, and it will go through, it will grade, they get 2 attempts. So let's say I have a student, he gets an 80. He wants to redo it, he goes right back in, redoes it, he gets a 100. Well, at midnight tonight, what's going to happen is Canvas gradebook is going to tell my district's gradebook that that student got a 100. And so without me ever having to touch it, it does all of that. And then guess what? Next year, if I want to use that same assignment, it will do it all again. So I didn't go to the copier. I didn't even have to transfer grades between gradebooks. So I just strongly suggest, if your district uses Canvas, especially really heavily, talk to your ITRT or whoever is above you and just explain to them that grade passback would make everybody's lives easier, because it certainly has mine. And Canvas did not pay me to say any of that, I promise. So the next thing is Google Forms, which is tried but true, right? I feel like it's the simplest tool to use because a lot of us are already using Google Forms. And again, I know that Microsoft has a product that is almost identical to this. So use that tool. For forms, there are lots of question types. Not as many per se as the Canvas quiz, but I still think it gets the job done, right? For those teachers who are just working on substituting worksheets for something digital, I think it's great. I use it for all my quizzes and tests because I really like the locked mode feature on Forms that stops them from opening another tab. Google Forms also, it embeds in Canvas, but it does not put the grades in the grade book. So that is one step you have to take. But again, it all auto grades. So for me, just copying those grades over into my grade book isn't a huge deal for me, but that is, I guess, one drawback to it. But again, students can automatically get feedback. You can have them either submit the form and it can show them answers right away. Or another little addition to Google Forms is response validation, which is if you're in a Google form, there's 3 little dots at the bottom of each question. If you click those, one of the options is going to be response validation. Essentially what it is it won't let them type in a wrong answer. So this would be for more of like a math style question, or where they're typing in a word or something singular like that. So for example, if the answer to the question is 23, if a student tries to type in 57, I've set it so that it will say, try again, make sure you use this equation. So it gives them a little hint. And what I like about it is they know right away on question 1 whether or not they're doing the process correctly. Now, another oldie but a goodie is Wizer.me or Wizer.me. It has lots of pre-made content. It used to be all free, but now there is a premium feature. But to be honest, I can still get away with the free version. I don't need to pay. But if I know it has some additional features that are nice if you use Classroom and things like that. I think it's really easy to use for students to access it. You just sign in with Google, so not a big deal. It embeds in Canvas, so you know, it can be right there. You can also get a link and you could just paste that link in Canvas. But what I started using Wizer.me for, this was back in the day when we were all on Classroom. Google Forms didn't have some of the question types that my SOLs mimicked. So that drag and drop, that matching and things like that. So Wizer.me has those TEI style questions that I liked. And then lastly is Quiziz. So I love Quiziz, but I was told last week by my students that it's not cool anymore. But essentially it's kind of like Bookit or Gimkit or Quizlet Live, where students are answering questions and they get points for it. I like it because again, there's lots of pre-made content. They also have a freemium version, but I've been able to get away with the free version. So don't feel like you need to spend any money. But if you do really like it and you like those additional features, you could, of course, purchase it. I like that it auto grades. You can embed it in Canvas if you want. And it's one of, like I said, those gamified assignments where you can either play it live as a whole class, or you can assign it asynchronously. Again, this was by no means an exhaustive list of tools, but just some of the few when I looked through my assignments that I used most frequently. So what I want to leave you with is this. If you turn the wheel 1 degree, eventually the ship will turn around. So you don't have to do every single thing that I mentioned. Just pick 1 or 2 to start with. And then if you start to feel comfortable with those, pick 1 or 2 more, right? You can eventually become a super productive person, and you will have good days and you will have bad days, and that's okay. But we want to rejuvenate ourselves. We don't want to burn out. We want to be able to spend time with our friends and family and not live in school. So thank you all so much for coming to my session. Linked on this last slide is a Padlet that has all sorts of resources and tutorials for things I talked about. And thank you so much. I appreciate it. Have a good day.